Hello Year 8s, welcome to the video lesson that I didn't tell you about. Doesn't matter, today is a video lesson. It's pre-recorded for your ease. However, if you wish to ask any questions, please feel free to ask those in the normal comment section and show my homework. You know how this works. So, coming up, you have an assessment. As of this lesson, you have a week to prepare. Because next week on our live lesson, and we will be having a live lesson, we shall be doing an assessment in that time. So what will happen is I will have the source paper. It's on sources. I will have the source paper ready for you. I shall put that out during the lesson, and then you will have that lesson with it up on a computer screen to answer the questions, take a picture of what you've done as is standard, and I will then mark those assessments to the best of my ability. The idea is you do it in the live lesson so it doesn't bleed over into the rest of your work, and you now know it's coming. So, to recap very quickly, next week, source assessment. You bring paper and a pen. You may use your books if you wish, but if you want to use other paper, that's fine. You label your answers. You take a photograph of each of the pages you write in that time, and you submit those photographs either via email or on Show My Homework. I don't mind which, provided you're able to do it. And then I shall mark those questions and get your feedback back to you. I shall write a sentence for each question, possibly more, so you know individually what the questions mean, and then I shall give it an overall grade out of, well, I'll talk about that in a moment, and you'll also get the overall grade after we've collated all of the different papers from across Year 8, because we have to check these things and we have to make sure that it's fair. So that's where we're heading. A week from today, you will be doing an assessment. It's going to be very exciting. A remote assessment. I know. I'm very excited. I hope you are too. It's going to be great. Well, if not great, it's going to be at least interesting to see what turns out at the other end. Today, then, I am going to take you through how to answer such an assessment, because it seems only fair. So welcome to an introduction to sources. But this introduction to sources is different to how you're used to doing them. At least I hope it is. I hope I haven't done something similar. So, here goes nothing. Working with sources, an introduction for Year 8 students. That's you! You are the Year 8 students! Yes, you are! Sorry, that was unnecessary, and I apologise. So, what are the assessment objectives? What am I hoping to achieve in this, hopefully, reasonably short video to give you plenty of time to go backwards and forwards and check all the different bits and ask any questions you may have on Show My Homework? Well, overall, we're going to look at the forthcoming exam. I'm calling it an exam, not an assessment, because, well, it's based on GCSE stuff, and you're doing it at home, and it's not in a usual situation. So we'll call it an exam. Why not? Let's make it sound good. Bring your parents in. Tell them you're doing a GCSE exam in Year 8 for history. Why ever not? That seems good for me. So don't worry, shouldn't be stressful. It should be a celebration of how good you guys are. And let's be honest, you are very, very good. Thank you, by the way, to all of you providing work for me to feed back on. It's really appreciated. So, 4 things I'm going to try and cover. 1, why is source work important in history? 2, what to expect from a source paper that's coming up. 3, how to approach the different styles of questions. You've seen them before Christmas. You might remember them. They're exactly the same this time round, just different sources. And 4, to try out some examples together. Now, you may answer these in full, in written word, why ever not, or you may answer them in note form to get an idea about how they work. But I'll explain. Why bother with sources anyway? What's the point? Where do we get information from as historians? We get it from the leavings of the past, the things that people in the past did and left behind and didn't really care for why they did that they had their own reasons, and that's all we've got to go on. No one ever leaves stuff behind for historians of the future to find. Well, I say that. I did keep a diary when I was a teenager, a little older than yourselves, on the grounds that I wanted historians of the future to have an insight into life in Britain when I was living. Specifically my life, I guess, and that was a stated aim in my diary, because I am a very boring man, and I was an even more boring teenager. Trust me, I've read them. Mostly they're reports on episodes of things that I've seen on the television, and various things that are not terribly interesting. One of my favourite sections, and sorry Dad if you're watching this, was there's an entry in the diary that simply reads, "Dad killed me today, full stop." That's it, that's all it says. He clearly didn't, because, well, ta-da! And I have no idea what that meant. So anyway, my point is, most people who are not me leave things behind for doing other jobs. So, I don't know, historians of the future find stuff that's supposed to do something, and then we have to reconstruct what the past was like based on that information. Using that information is a raw test of intelligence for you as historians. It is a challenge. It's not Well, it is difficult, but it's a form of difficulty that you should enjoy. It's a form of difficulty you shouldn't be frightened of. It's a form of difficulty that will let you grow and become strong historians in the future, because that's what this is all about. It develops your ability to be critical of what you see around you. When you see something on the news, when you hear people talking about things, when you see something on social media, you won't take it at face value. You'll think carefully about what it means, who created it, what they were trying to do, what you can learn from it, and what they've put in there without realising they've done it. Even, especially, one might argue, stuff that is lies or that isn't entirely true. That tells you an awful lot about the writer or the creator of the source. It tells you an awful lot about what the reasoning behind it was, because it tells you that they're lying, and you know that, so you know, okay, what are they lying about? Why are they lying about it? Why this way? Why in this particular direction? You will learn how to read between the lines. We call this inference. You'll learn to recognise that things aren't always black and white. There aren't always there are two clear sides, but the people who are living at the time might not fall into either camp fully, and they might be in a bit in both. And you'll see that in information around you today, that there is no easy way of us and them. There's no easy way of setting up one side of the argument and the other side of the argument and creating balance. That's not how human beings work. You know this. Every discussion you've ever had with your parents, and especially if you've argued with a sibling, you know full well that arguments are rarely rational or logical or even consistent and coherent. Often, human beings are irrational, emotional, and constantly changing sides. So as historians, when we look at what people have left behind, we've got to intuit all of that. It's very fun. It's why history is great, because we learn about the complexity of human beings that have lived in the past. Sources, therefore, are a great way to properly engage with the past. I mean, sure, history books exist, textbooks exist, websites exist, videos exist. I am literally doing one right now. But you want to learn about history properly. You want to be a proper historian. Well, you look for yourself. You find information. Now, source is just short for sources of information. It's that simple. It can be anything from the past that helps us learn about the past. So literally everything from the past. It can be archaeological evidence. It can be stuff dug up out of the ground. It can be an artifact. It can be a piece of paper with writing on it. It can be something to make writing. It can be a house. It can be a floor plan. It can be a written account, a diary, a letter, a receipt, wages, anything. Literally anything. And they're all sources. And if you're a bit mercenary and you sort of rely on school to provide you with numbers to make you feel good about yourself, and to be fair, that is how education is set up. This is not an insult. It leads to examination success. If you can use sources well, you will do well at GCSE and beyond. So, from a purely mercenary level, sources are interesting. Okay, I've spent 8 minutes introducing this. Time to get down to business. Let's do an example. Now, you will find this PowerPoint attached to Show My Homework, where you found the link for this video. So go and have a look. It's slide 3, I think, and possibly 4. 3, I think. And here you have a source you've seen before. I've just blown it up to a larger size. It's sketches from India when Britain owned it. It says, give 2 things that you can infer from this source about the treatment of India in the British Empire. 2 things you can infer. And infer means to read between the lines. But sir, there's no writing. There's no reading between the lines. It's just an image. And I say, thank you, rhetorical device. It's a figure of speech. What can you learn that the source doesn't directly tell you? And then you back it up with what the source directly tells you. So, play along, pause the video at this point, and have a go at coming up with 2 inferences. 2 things you can learn from this source without writing exactly what the source shows you. If you're playing along, that should have given you long enough to pause and have a go at it. Let's talk about this. I've changed the view so you can see on the video when to start again. Let's go back to it then. 2 things you can learn. Well, there are several things you can learn. 1, you can learn that Indians are relegated to the position of servants rather than as people in their own right. We've got a European lady being waited upon by a man in uniform. Secondly, you can learn that Britain took the view that India was there for their enrichment and their comfort. We talked about this in class, I think, or in the lesson that I did on this, where that Indian is clearly dressed in clothing that's not appropriate to the climate and therefore is probably suffering in order to provide this, presumably a drink, to this European lady who's relaxing. So there's exploitation, and there is the way in which we're exploiting them, the use of the army, and you can link that to things that you know. You can also link it to things in the source. You can literally say, well, he's clearly in the army, he's wearing a military uniform. That would count. And therefore they're exploiting the army. Or he's wearing clothes that are inappropriate for the climate, whereas the European lady is wearing very appropriate clothing, and therefore it's an exploitative relationship where Britain takes what it needs from India, and Indian comfort is left behind in the dust. For example, I know there was a famine in the 1870s, which proves my point. And you would be dead right. That is an excellent answer. Well done, rhetorical device. If you came up with anything like that, you're on the right lines. Don't worry, I only went through 2 inferences. There are more you can make, and I'm sure you've made some. If you've covered anything that I've not mentioned, please put it in the comments on the Show My Homework, and I'll do my level best to get back to you on the feedback. Broken it back. Thank you. So, what's the paper you're going to be doing all about? It's about industrialisation and empire, which is what we've been learning since before Christmas. So it's a fairly lengthy thing that we've been doing. We did a practice piece on this already on child labour. So you know that child labour will play a small role, and you know it's going to go further than child labour, and given the fact that I've included the word empire, you know it's going to include India. You also know it's not going to include the picture source I just showed you, because I'm not trying to give you all the answers, I'm just telling you what's on the paper. What do you need to know? It's using material in context, it's based on the Edexcel GCSE style. There's a lot of noise in this room today, it's like normal, we'll get used to it. It's 50 minutes in length, roughly speaking. So don't worry if you go over. When we do our live lesson, there'll be time for people to arrive, and I'm going to try and keep it to 50 minutes, just so you know what the timing is. So I will try and keep it to 2 time, but this is remote learning. It won't be perfect. As long as you're not spending 3 hours on it, no one cares. If you're spending 55 minutes or you spend a full hour on it, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. There will be 24 marks available. Note, that's slightly less than 1 mark every 2 minutes. So, roughly speaking, each mark equates to 2 minutes. I'll come back to this later. And there are only 5 sources. If you can print off the source paper, that would be amazing. But I fully appreciate it might not be available in the time that you have to carry out the assessment. So don't worry if you can't. If it were on paper, you could draw all over it. There will be 4 questions at a GCSE standard, much like there was before Christmas. So you've had some practice. They're the same questions you've already done on child labour, only with a different topic and, well, slightly different topic, and a different set of material to back it up. Because obviously, it's going to do the same thing on child labour all over again. What's the point in that? So it'll be different questions, but the same style is what I mean. And they're a GCSE standard. That is literally what they appear like in the GCSEs. All that happens in GCSE is they put a different style of material for you to use with the questions. The style of question remains the same. There will be 3 areas you're expected to cover. Inference, which we've just tried with, and you're reasonably good at this by now. You can learn things from a source it doesn't directly tell you. Utility, and this causes problems. Why is a source useful? Think positively. What can we use it for as historians? Even sources that are factually incorrect or possibly even lying. They can tell us a lot about the attitudes of the people creating the source, and they can tell us a lot about what's going on at the time, given what they decide to show and what they decide to obscure, hide, or otherwise get rid of. So we can learn a lot from even the most unreliable sources. So simply a source is unreliable, untrustworthy, that's really good, because we know that, and we know why it's unreliable and untrustworthy, and then we can drill down and find out what we really want to know. Basically, as historians, we get to use anything. So try and be positive first. By all means include limitations, but you don't have to. More on that in a moment. And finally, interpretations, which is what we've been working on since the very beginning of this year. So the slavery novels you did right at the beginning were all about why certain people viewed things in different ways. Here, you're going to use that with actual historical evidence to back it up. We've built up to this point. Now, some of you were doing that in your slavery novel extracts already, and you were doing a fantastic job. All you've got to do now is condense it into a timed situation. How do you do this? Well, you use quotes, or if it's not a source you can quote because it's an image, you use details from that, or you use paraphrase, because sometimes you can't find an exact quote with a few words, and writing the whole thing out just takes forever, so you paraphrase it, and you say the source says blah, 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 and this means blah, 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 and you don't have to directly quote. We call it a paraphrase. It's obvious you're using the source. That's all we ask. The essential skills, the special moves, if you will, on a fighting game. I don't know, you button mash. Maybe I'm old hat, aren't I? I'm out of cultural reference points. It doesn't matter. I'm an old man. You get the idea. Special moves that you've got to use, combinations, are things what we call cross-referencing. That is using two sources together to make a single point. So two sources may agree, or better yet, disagree, and then you can explain what that means in relation to the question. So if a question asks you to use two particular sources, you can then compare them to make the point you want to make. Sometimes that's the only way you can explain it fully, and that's perfectly okay. And next is own knowledge, stuff you know from your lessons. So we've done an awful lot of work on industrialization and empire. You've got an awful lot written in your books, some of you incredible amounts, some of you with just beautiful detail, just beautiful. So it behooves you to know what's in your books. Don't worry, it's not a knowledge test. Get an idea, get a feeling. You won't have to remember exact references to source material, and you won't have to remember exact references to any particular events. A couple of dates here and there are always helpful, but by no means given, and a couple of names are always useful, but again, you don't need to remember those kind of details just yet. Something pointed, specific, succinct, an impression, an idea about each lesson would be a really good idea. But don't get too hung up. Know things, revise things, remember what were in those lessons. Yes, absolutely, go back and check. But don't test yourself to the nth degree trying to remember literally everything. You'll go insane. You've only got a week, and that's very deliberate on our part, so don't worry too much. What are the skills all about? If it's all to do with skills, what do we mean? Well, reliability. Can you trust the source? And we've been through this already. There'll be no direct question on reliability. If it's unreliable, consider why you know. If it's reliable, is that useful to us or not? Think like an historian. You might say, well, sir, if it's reliable, of course it's useful to us. It tells us the truth. But so do unreliable sources. They just don't mean to. We can find out the truth by what they decide to say or not say. No one deliberately lies, I mean, not directly. There are a couple of instances in history, but generally speaking, people bend the truth with what they think they can get away with, rather than lying outright. No one just makes stuff up, because, well, we'd soon spot it as historians. It's kind of obvious. It's a bit like when people lie about fights in school. If you're interviewing people, you're going to pick that up relatively quickly. Never lie directly. Only lie by telling the truth in a different way. Utility. Think positively. What is the source actually useful for? What can it tell us about life in the past? Is it useful for the question that we need to know about? Most sources are, in some way or another. However, some sources are more useful than other sources, so consider comparison to prove your point. This source is more useful because X, Y, and Z than this source, which is still useful because X, Y, and Z, but it's less useful because Y, I don't know, A, B, C. Whatever. You come up with an idea and you can compare thusly. That would, for example, work for an 8-mark question on utility, not that I'm hinting strongly. Think about the purpose of the source. For what reason was it created? What was the job it was designed to do? That's what we mean by purpose. Sometimes people say why a source was created, but then they get confused and they'll tell me things like, oh, this source on cholera was created because there was a cholera outbreak. That's called motive. It's still a why, it's just a different kind of why. So purpose is what is the job the source is trying to do. And that can tell us why it's useful or not, because we know why it was made and for what it was doing. And therefore, if there's any inaccuracies or unreliabilities, we know why. Consider that source on cholera, where there was a source saying, oh, doctors will sort it. Would they? Really? No, of course not. They had no idea how it spread. But it reassured people, stopped them panicking. Think about the sources with your money or your life. Do you really think people in the 1800s thought skeletons were roaming the countryside dressed in a black cowl, killing people with a scythe? Well, of course not. But it was a metaphor, and therefore they were explaining something because of what it was designed to do. It was designed to encapsulate a whole bunch of scientific knowledge in a simple, easy to understand image. That is, death is on the water. The water is the problem, we need to clean it up. Do you see how it works? These are the purposes, and they can tell us a lot about what a source is trying to show. Then there's inference, and I've already gone into a great detail on this, but just a reminder, it's what you can work out from the source by reading between the lines, that figure of speech, trying to work out what the source is telling us without telling us directly. So historians of the future may look back at this video and they would know that there was a lockdown, even though I've not mentioned it directly until this moment. They would know from the early parts the purpose of what I'm attempting to do, and they would know how remote lessons went down. They might also get really uppity and uptight about the fact that my PowerPoint is really old and uses Trebuchet, and it's a tired looking PowerPoint. Then there's comparison, which is simple. It's taking two sources and saying how similar and how different they are. Obviously sources are similar or different, I get that, but it's not a spot the difference. Oh, ring it here and then ring it here. This one's got this word and this one does not. Hooray! You're better than that. You're going to look at how similar they are. Well, they're similar in the following ways, but there are differences as well. And the differences can be explained by this reason. Do you see how it works? So you give a sort of a weighed opinion. Now, to be fair, at this level in Year 8, we're not expecting an essay, we're just not. The question will be relatively simple when it comes to comparison. It'll say, how different are they? And you give a couple of differences and back it up. That's it. This is what the differences are. Here's how I can tell. Bang. The next thing is about why they say different things. The interpretation, if you will. And we think about provenance, the proof, Nancy, the caption at the bottom of the source, where it's from, who created the source. And you'll know a little bit about the sort of person that created it. Even if you don't know the person themselves, you'll be able to identify where they're coming from. So with child labour, it was reformers and conservatives. With empire, it'll be people who don't like empire and people who clearly do. Do you see what I mean? It'll be relatively simple to work out where they're from because, well, we've chosen them for that purpose. Your job is to work out what we've left for you using the provenance to help. Don't forget the special moves. Cross-reference and own knowledge. If you know a little bit, it'll be easier to interpret the sources because you can put them into context. And if you can compare the sources to make a point, it'll be easier. You'll be able to make that point more effectively. So, time for some example questions. Time for you guys to do some work. Here are some questions about me. What two things can you infer about Mr. A from source A? Here is source A. Mr. Exon is the happiest, most outstanding teacher I have ever met, and I'm not surprised he was nominated for Teacher of the Year 2005. I really was. He has superb dress sense. I know. And that must cost him a lot of money and many friends. Okay. What can we learn from this source about Mr. Atkinson? Can you find two inferences? Oh, by the way, the provenance is as follows. Comment made by a student in Mr. Atkinson's sixth form group in 2010. Mr. Atkinson had taught the student for 7 years. Pause the video. Have a go. What two things do you reckon you can learn from this source? Now, I'm going to assume you paused the video and you've come back to the video and it's replaying. What two things did you learn? You could learn perhaps that Mr. Atkinson was popular with his sixth form set. You could learn perhaps that Mr. Atkinson was indeed nominated as Teacher of the Year, meaning he must have been relatively good and must have been good in comparison to other teachers at the school in 2005, otherwise everyone would have been nominated for that. You could learn that Mr. Atkinson might have gone down in skill since 2005 because, well, you've got me in 2021 and you can make of that what you will. Do you see what I mean? You can use a bit of your own knowledge. You could also use the provenance to say, well, he did teach a student for 7 years. Mr. Atkinson can build a rapport with certain students. Boy, and I already know you're waiting to tell me I can't in some cases. So it's fair. Boyan can take it. He's a good lad. So, you get the idea. Next question. How useful are sources B and C for an historian studying Mr. A's impact in Ecclesbourne? Source B is a receipt found in A5 in 2014, my teaching room. And it's from Aldi. That's a cut price retailer. It says pack of 4 soups for £2. You can read it for yourselves. Point is, How useful is it in telling you about the impact on the school? Well, straight away you know that it's my teaching room. I mean, I had to tell you that, it's not your teaching room. And second of all, you can learn that, well, it was picked up. Someone clearly cared about what this said and retained it. Thirdly, you could say, well, yeah, is it really Mr. Atkinson's receipt though? It's just a receipt from Aldi. It's just on the floor of A5 where Mr. Atkinson teaches, or taught in 2014 at any rate. What does that tell us? It might not tell us anything at all. Could have been anyone's receipt, right? So there's pluses and minuses. You can learn some things, and you can also say, yeah, but it's dodgy. And that's fine. Both are equally true. You can then weigh up to decide how much you want to trust this source. But then you look at source C, and if you compare it, it might help. Source C says, I spend less than £20 a week on food, and I'm proud of it. That was me at a history department meeting in 2013. Oh, well, source B is a receipt for less than £20. And the fact that someone wrote that down in a history department meeting means I'm making some kind of impact. My colleagues are writing down what I say. So that means something, right? And why would I feel the need to say that? Obviously, I bring my personal life to school. I'm making an impact somewhere, right? Also, you know me. You know I don't spend a lot of money. I've talked about it before. You know that I like talking about random things. So again, there's a lot going on there. And you could build those together and explain how they are useful in one way of talking about my impact in school, bear in mind, but also things that are less impactful and less useful. So source C tells you nothing about my teaching. It tells you nothing about, well, me beyond the fact that I don't like spending money. Source B might not be my receipt. Do you see how there are positives and negatives to be drawn from each source, and comparing them, they do back each other up a little bit. But even then, disposable razors point to beard from own knowledge. D and E give different views of Mr. A having friends. D is a photograph of me on a school trip to Cromford in 2013. On the school bus, you'll notice there's an empty seat next to me, but someone is taking the picture, and I am smiling. Source E is a story from Mr. James about us going for a curry in a social event in 2014. Clearly, I enjoy going out with colleagues. And we don't go out outside of work as colleagues unless we're also friends. So there's two pluses and negatives. If you read source A in a bit more detail, you'll see what I mean. So have a go. What is the difference in views about friends? Have a go. Pause the video and then have a go. I'm going to assume you paused the video. I'm going to assume you've had a go. Basically speaking, source D seems to imply that I don't have many friends. There's an empty seat next to me on the photograph, and although I'm smiling and someone is taking the picture, doesn't seem like I know many people. Whereas source E very clearly points out that I go out with friends from work, so I have friends. There's your biggest difference. Or if you prefer, the first one shows that I do have friends who are committed to taking an amusing photograph, whereas in source E, I'm very tight, and it's clear that Mr. James didn't enjoy the experience as much as he was hoping, and perhaps I'm not going to make friends by being tight, financially tight. Does that make sense? You could use them either way. I don't really mind. The point is that they're as an illustration on how to compare sources. The follow-up question will be, why do you think they give such different views? And that's based on who created them. Mr. James is a teacher in the humanities department. He is a teacher of RS. We clearly know each other professionally, so he's going to say certain things in a certain way, whereas the other one is an anonymous photograph on a school trip. We don't know who took that photograph. Obviously it's going to give a different view, because we can imply by this hair over here, it's probably a student, and the fact that I'm putting on a silly face, and the fact that I own the photograph, means I was clearly a teacher, and they gave me the photograph afterwards, and I knew that I was going to use it for something, like this lesson. So you see where I am going, I hope. So, some top tips for the source paper. Read all the sources before you begin. When you get that paper, when it's released to you in that live lesson, take your time, take a breath, read what the sources say. 2. Look carefully at the sources' captions, their provenance. Does this affect what the sources say? Just to recap, provenance! Look carefully. It's important. 4th top tip. Pace yourself. Set it out. roughly 2 minutes per mark. Roughly, you can make it shorter if you like. If you've spent longer on the reading, make it 1.5 minutes per mark. There's still enough time. So if you've got a 4-mark question, you're spending around about 6 minutes on it. If you've got an 8-mark question, you're spending around about, 15 minutes. Think of it that way. An 8-mark question should be twice as long as a 4-mark question. It should just be, that's just the way it is. And in 15 minutes, you're expected to write around about 3 short Peel paragraphs. You'll notice I've been trying to weave that into lessons since Christmas and before. So that is good practice. Whereas a 4-mark answer is, generally speaking, a single short paragraph, Peel style. You make a point, you explain it, you give your evidence, you link back to the question. Those can happen multiple times and together as well. Don't worry about that. You don't have to follow it exactly. Oh, it's a P, then an E, then an E, then an L. The E and the L might come together, for example. Leave plenty of time at the end of the exam to check over what you've written. And I don't mean like, well, I wrote that. It's clearly me. I mean literally going through and making sure you've answered what you think you've answered. Are there any words that you expected to find there that aren't? Reading through, have you missed something? If you have, put a star, add it on the end. It's okay. You're taking a photograph of it. I'll figure it out. I'll learn. Don't worry. The important thing is for you to get the information down. This isn't a handwriting test. As long as I can read your handwriting, we're good. And you've seen my handwriting. So don't worry. Remember the special moves. Know things. Know things from your own knowledge. Know it from your books so that when you're using those sources, you know where they're from. You know roughly what they're talking about. Secondly, where possible, use sources together to make a point. Won't always be possible, won't always be appropriate, but sometimes it will be. Be on the lookout for it. If you don't find it throughout the entire paper, fine, whatever, but look for it. And with own knowledge, obviously you'll find a way of using it and shoehorn it in somehow, but make sure you're answering the question with it. There are ways of bending what you write to fit any question. That's the skill we're testing for. Some of you will take this like ducks to water. Others of you, it'll take a lot of hard work. But all of you will be able to do it eventually. Don't worry, it's a skill you can learn. And finally, make notes. We usually say draw arrows on the paper itself. There's no prize for the cleanest paper. We'll just have to photocopy again next year. You're not going to get a photocopied paper. If you can print it off in time, that's amazing, but I appreciate you might not be able to. So if you can draw notes on a piece of paper before you begin and just tell yourself which sources are relevant for which questions or which quotes are relevant and just jot them down quickly, that is an amazing tool. That is not cheating. On the contrary, that is good exam practice. So please make use of those things. In conclusion, and I'm just going to draw it to a close. I'm sorry, I've slightly gone over my half hour that I was hoping to do with this video, and I recognise you're going to have to move backwards and forwards, and there's a bit of time for you to do a task as well. You have to work hard to succeed in history. History is difficult. We make no bones about it. Of course it is. But everything worthwhile doing is difficult. Nothing comes easily that's worthwhile. We know this. You know this. If you work hard, you get a sense of achievement. So yes, you will find this challenging. I hope you do. I hope none of you are sat there going, it's a piece of cake. So easy. I'm hoping you're all going to have to work hard on it. But I'm hoping it's the kind of hard work that is enjoyable, that comes with a sense of achievement, that you get something out of at the end. That's what history is. It's prized by employers and universities, so it's important for you to do well, even if you don't take it as an option. And I know it's only year 8, but if you're not thinking about taking it in GCSE or A-level or beyond, don't worry. History will always be helpful because of what I've just explained. Learning to read between the lines, understanding nuance, taking nothing at face value, questioning things in a critical manner. The key is knowledge and technique. You've got to know how to answer the questions, but you've got to know the stuff in order for that to make any kind of sense. I mean, you can know all the technique in the world, but if you don't know the context, you're going to struggle. Equally, you can know all the context in the world, but if you don't know how to answer the question, you're just going to end up telling me a knowledge parade, which is great, but it ain't going to get you any marks or make you a better historian. Always use cross-reference or own knowledge. One or the other should be in every question you do, on some level, even if it's not specific. You need both. We all know this. Take advantage of revision time. You've got a week. And you've got a homework between now and this assessment, so about 25 minutes in a normal round, to spend just going over things and reminding yourself what's going on, just to recap. And if you want to come back and do more of this video, do. There's nothing wrong with that. Do it again, why not? You can't lose marks for being wrong. If you make a mistake, leave it. Move on. If it absolutely has to be dealt with, put a single line through it. Don't waste time obliterating it. Don't waste time erasing it. It's okay. You're under timed conditions. This is not going on a wall somewhere. It's not a finished piece of work. It's literally your brain distilled onto a page so that we can mark it and give you feedback that will help you. So, accept being rough and ready. I'd much rather that, with more detail, than nothing at all. So, Yuvraj, I'm talking to you right now. Write everything, even if you think it's wrong. Boyan, write. Just get on with it. Don't worry about how you're going to start. Everybody, write everything. Hal, if you have to cross something out, don't worry about it. It's fine. I won't think any less of any of you if you cross something out, but you don't have to. You can only gain marks. You can't lose them. You must ensure that you have enough time though, so pace yourself carefully. Look carefully at the timing, and when we come to do it in the live lesson, I will give you reminders. I'll give you a reminder when you've got half an hour left, I'll give you another reminder at 15 minutes, and a final one at 5. Don't ask if you haven't heard a reminder, because those are the only times I'll tell you, deliberately. There's a reason for that. Don't worry. If you're worried about time and I haven't given an announcement, don't worry about the time. Check your own watch. Check the computer clock. Why ever not? And you've got to make sure you answer all the questions, obviously. Obviously, that's why all's in caps and also underlined. In other words, bring it on. And that brings us to the end of the video. I've gone over a bit, it's 35 minutes, 36 minutes, I do apologise. Hopefully, it all fits. Why is this recorded and not a live lesson? Because it wouldn't work as well as a live lesson. I hope you understand that. The live lesson will be the assessment. If you have been, thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely rest of your day, Year 8, and I look forward to seeing you for the live lesson next week, where we'll be doing the assessment.